We have been handed internal emails from a Plano school, public school, that testify about just how radical left-wing the upcoming curriculum is going to be. In a place like Texas, possibly, the kind of things that are being recommended for your kids to read in middle and high school will astound you. I'm Dr. Duke, she's Katie, and this is the Dr. Duke Show. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Dr. Duke Show, the only program that keeps you educated on the craziness impacting K-12 classrooms and college campuses around the world. Today, our international correspondent Alex Newman discusses with me a new movement to get Black Lives Matter propaganda and the 1619 Project adopted into your kids' school curriculum. But first, we send it over to Katie for a look at the health of our republic.
Incompetency is running rampant across this country, and you may have noticed at the local level with those in charge of your hometown. How do you know this has affected you? Well, do you live in a city run by a Democratic mayor? Then bingo, there's your answer. Let me tell you, I am entirely sick of the fact that not much of anything has been done about these Democrat mayors, governors, and representatives for all of the bullshit they have been spewing. Sure, President Trump has tweeted about some of it, but sane America doesn't live on Twitter. So fine. I guess I'll just do the RNC and Trump campaign staff's job for them. Roll clip.
It is 2020, a time when Democrat mayors turn a blind eye to crime because they hate you. And would you rather live in fear?
Let go of me!
While they make up lies.
It's not an armed takeover. We will be fine in Seattle. We don't need the president's help.
Instead of trying to keep you safe,
we will not allow federal troops in our city.
They prioritize political pandering.
We are not denigrating anything. We are liberating Fifth Avenue.
Yes, I'm the mayor, but I'm a black woman first.
This is an egregious overreaction on the part of the federal officer.
And go hand in hand with rioters and looters, at least until they get turned on. And then they just walk away to cry.
Go home, Jacob, go home! Go home, Jacob, go home! Go home, Jacob, go home!
Keep electing them to get more of the same empty promises.
And change is coming in this city. I have no doubt about that.
But it's been a blessing, and let me tell you why.
We already know why. We can see through the bull. This November, think for yourselves.
Share this video, if for nothing but to let people see what the media refuses to be honest about. This could be a great campaign ad. It could be huge. As you have borne witness, all we hear from the talking heads is that everything, and I mean everything, that has happened since Trump came down that escalator is his fault. No matter that many of these people who hate Trump and claim to not believe in anything treat him like a god, little g. They idolize him while also kneeling at Satan's altar because they kneel for anything you tell them to. And then, they demand you do the same.
Joe Biden showing solidarity with demonstrators taking a knee.
You are not the president. No one who leads so many could possibly kneel so quickly.
We need leaders who won't kneel like this.
It's better not to have on high heels.
That clip never gets old, unlike Nancy. We are now less than 100 days until the election, and that means panic porn is full throttle for everything, including more of the kneeling for the communist organization Black Lives Matter, under the guise that it is to honor George what's-his-name.
This legislation is worthy of George Kirby's name.
Floyd. George Floyd. Nancy is all about giving names to things. Accuracy be damned. As we know, it's somehow racist to say Wuhan virus, despite it coming from, Wuhan, China. So Nancy took it upon herself to change it.
And in fact, clearly, it is the Trump virus.
And she wasn't done naming things with Trump.
This president, I have a new name for him, Mr. Make Matters Worse. He has made matters worse from the start. Delay, denial, it's a hoax, it'll go away magically, it's a miracle, and all the rest.
She actually just gave out the slogan for Joe Biden's campaign. Delay, denial, it's a hoax, it'll go away magically. Fingers crossed. But on a scale of 1 to awesome, Mr. Make Matters Worse is a weak burn. Do better, Nancy, or you won't get your ice cream. On the note of something everyone should enjoy, like ice cream, the national pastime returned this week, so there is something to cheer about, even if it is just the one thing. And if you watched Dr. Anthony Fauci throw out the first pitch of the season before the start of the Washington Nationals New York Yankees game, you also have something to laugh about.
Dr. Anthony Fauci.
That was as bad as the last president's throw.
Just a bit outside.
Meanwhile, at the White House,
Donald Trump is not that bad.
And that's the truth. Trump's not that bad. Someone who is that bad is Representative Jerry Nadler, a leader of the Trump impeachment Captain Planet Squad, who happens to represent the Lollipop Guild, and just like the mayors, wants you to believe that everything is unicorns and rainbows.
There's violence across the whole country. Do you disavow the violence from Antifa? That's happening in Portland right now? There's riots.
That's a myth that's being spread only in Washington, D.C.
About Antifa in Portland?
Yes.
Sir, there's videos everywhere online. There's fires and riots. They're throwing fireworks at federal officers. DHS is there. Look online. It gets crazy, Mr. Nadler.
That is crazy, Mr. Nadler. Fleckus is correct. Roll clip.
Portland police declared a riot downtown this morning as protesters faced off with officers for the 58th night in a row. Police say the crowd threw bottles and rocks over the fence at officers. Some even shot fireworks at the courthouse, while others tried cutting through the fence with power tools.
That is Portland, and it has been for the past 2 months. It's a myth that everything is under control. It's a myth that politicians are wanting to do anything about it. It's all a myth. But it is true that Jerry and the gang are happy to cash their paychecks and sleep in their cozy beds without a care to truly solve the issues at hand. None of those Democrat mayors or the national leaders have done anything for years and years.
Trump's not that bad. Just trying to raise awareness.
Trump has many personal flaws. We all do. But what the Democratic Party is pushing collectively is much more dangerous, deadly even. They manipulate, they perpetuate, and they defecate. Yes, defecate. We are talking about major cities run by Democrats, after all. The proof is in the city limits. Until next time, stay healthy, America.
Joined today by our international correspondent, Alex Newman, as usual for a Friday. Alex, how are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me, Duke.
Well, we were tipped off about a week ago from a concerned parent in the Plano, Texas school district that what was going on in the Plano district schools was about to get real nasty real quick. All kinds of radical propaganda, for lack of a better word, anti-American, just in pro-Soviet, pro-Chinese communist, Black Lives Matter stuff about to enter the curriculum. We've got a guidance counselor, if I understand correctly, who we got a hold of some of her emails, internal emails, where she was pushing this really radical agenda on the faculty there. Tell us what's going on.
Yeah, thank you, Duke. This story is incredible. It's one of those that you kind of have to see to believe. And what happened was this school counselor, she's a licensed clinical social worker, LCSW, Diane Evans. We got some of her emails sending around to other officials in the school district promoting this Black Lives Matter propaganda, promoting a webinar having to do with Black Lives Matter. And the stuff that's in there, Duke, would blow your mind. For example, there's a Black Revolutionary reading list that people were encouraged to read. And this includes, and I'm not kidding you, a manual on guerrilla warfare by Ernesto Che Guevara, Fidel Castro's right-hand man, the guy who executed thousands of people for him, who incidentally was a virulent racist and hated black people. I don't know.
Not only that, but Che was the liberals. He was a terrible homophobe as well.
That's right.
He set up the Castro's killing fields, and the story that he used to shoot gay prisoners himself, took a perverse pleasure in doing that. I don't know if that's documentable or not, but certainly the fact that he was responsible for pretty much all the killing that happened in Cuba is staggering. And here she is promoting this. What gets me about this, Alex, is that killing is fine with the left as long as it's killing the right people. They'll come after, Thomas Jefferson is the worst man in history because he owned slaves, but they're apologizing for Che. It gets even worse. They're apologizing for Mao Zedong. Talk about that.
Yeah, it's incredible. I mean, this reading list it would blow your mind. You've got stuff by Karl Marx, right, the Communist Manifesto. You've got stuff by Lenin, The State and Revolution. You've got one called Black Revolution and Chairman Mao, something like that. And I've never read this book, but I looked it up, and the Maoists love it. They say that Chairman Mao was an icon, a hero for colored peoples everywhere. I guess they never heard of the Uyghurs, right? 3 million Uyghur Muslims in concentration camps in Western China, being sterilized and exterminated. You've got the Tibetan people, who of course are facing genocide from the Communist Chinese. You've got the largest mass murder in human history, something like 100 million people, not including 300 million unborn babies slaughtered by these maniacs. And yet they're telling us that Mao is this wonderful figure who is the defender of the rights of brown and black people everywhere, which is demented in an incredible kind of way. Another thing on the reading list, Duke, is the Green Book by terrorist mass murdering dictator, the late Muammar Gaddafi. Okay, so this is the kind of stuff that is now being peddled at the highest levels of a conservative school district in a conservative jurisdiction in a conservative state. This is not just like liberal propaganda. It'd be one thing like teaching the kids to vote for Hillary. That's disgusting enough. But we are now talking about promoting some of the worst savages and barbarians to have ever walked on this planet. People who just were obsessed with slaughtering innocent people. These are the books that paved the way for the extermination of hundreds of millions of innocent human beings in the last century. And they are now being promoted at the highest levels of a conservative school district in a conservative state. So parents, do the math.
Back from our break, joined again by Alex Newman. Alex, let's talk a little bit about that's a kind of a local problem in Texas. What you're going to hear, I'm sure, from the public school system is, it's part of your article, well, we didn't condone this. Somehow you got a hold of these internal meetings, these memos, but we don't condone this. It's not our fault, and so it's not a problem. So let's talk about the bigger problem, which is how this is happening across the country. Say a little bit more about the 1619 project. Let's talk about that. Make sure moms and dads know what that's all about.
Yeah, well, thank you, Duke. And you're right. The school district put out a statement. Oh, we didn't know about this. We didn't approve of it. We certainly don't support it, which is, of course, what they always say when they get caught. And so there's now kind of a mini scandal in Plano brewing. Local officials are upset. They want an investigation. But you're right. This is part of a much broader national problem. This is just the tip of the iceberg that we saw in Plano, Texas. And one of the ways that that's really obvious is the 1619 project. This is this crazy rewritten version of history that came out of the New York Times. There's a radical left-wing hate monger, Hannah Jones, something, one of the hyphenated last names, who is making the case that America is really the founding of America was in 1619 when the first African slaves were imported. And that everything since then, all the way up to the present day, is directly linked to slavery. The entire American experience is inextricably linked to slavery. And in fact, this idea continues to this day. And so this is now being imposed on school children all over the country. It's being incorporated into the curriculum, even though everybody, including the author, knows it's fraudulent, right? Again, left-wing historians, radical left-wing historians have come out and said, guys, this is just not true. This is just not accurate. You can't teach this. And yet it is being taught, and it completely reframes the idea of America. America's not about liberty. America's not about constantly striving to do better. It's not about God-given rights and all men are created equal and government exists to protect these rights. It's about slavery, 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 and slavery.
And the idea here is that the whole purpose that we're going to teach our kids of the founding of America, of the laws, the wars that America fought, the battles to free ourselves from tyranny, all of that was done for no other reason so that we could conscientiously import slaves. That's the whole purpose of this. We were too lazy to work. We were too lazy to think for ourselves. We wanted to create not a place of religious liberty, the pilgrims running away from persecution. We wanted to create this mass slave-holding institution for no other reason than our own venal wickedness.
That's exactly right. And it's a completely fake version of history. Anybody who's read the primary source documents knows that it's completely fake. Most of the founders were at least uncomfortable with slavery. Slavery was an institution that had been ubiquitous throughout human history until our founding fathers came along and they came up with this revolutionary idea, of course taken from the Bible, that all men are created equal, that all men are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. And that is what facilitated. I mean, it took less than a century from the time that was put on paper to the time that slaves in America were freed. Admittedly, it took a war, but that's how radical that was. Thousands of years of slavery, and then all men are created equal. They're endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. Less than 100 years later, we're abolishing slavery here, and then going around the world and helping to abolish it everywhere. So this New York Times 1619 project has it exactly backwards. But think about what the effects are going to be of teaching this to children. They are going to hate their own nation. They're going to want to dismantle America, and that's exactly what it was designed to do, and that's exactly what we're seeing now in these riots, this mayhem, this effort to demolish the United States as a nation and as an ideal. And if we don't reverse it, it's going to be all over. It's just that simple.
Well, kids are already hating their country. This is not new. What's unique about this is how much radical they're pushing it. There's already a non-history history curriculum that is anti-American in the schools. And now that you're going to attach these Black Lives components to it, what you're going to get is even more radical kids. Think about the middle class and upper class white kids who make up the bulk of Antifa and all of that racial violence, all of that violence in the street. And now these same kids in 10, 15 years are going to get a much more radical, much more anti-American curriculum. So we're pushing this really far out there, and it's going to be the detriment of this country.
It is, and I honestly don't believe our nation will survive another generation of this indoctrination. It's going to be crumbling, and we're seeing the beginnings of that now. It's going to get a whole lot worse as long as they continue to brainwash our children with our consent.
Radical sex, radical atheism, radical materialist sexual perspectives, a huge transgender and lesbian push, all of that stuff. And now you're going to be getting a full-on onslaught of Black Lives Matter propaganda, anti-white, anti-American history. Your schools are irredeemable. To send your kids into these schools, I don't care if they even do manage somehow to graduate from these schools able to read and do a little bit of math. At what price are you giving them those rudimentary backward skills given the test scores? Alex, thank you so much for joining us today. You're speechless, and you ask yourself, it has to be ignorance, doesn't it? I can't imagine parents knowing this and then following through with this.
It's time now for some real education. Hope is the Thing with Feathers is a lyric poem written by American poet Emily Dickinson. The manuscript of this poem appears in Fascicle 13, which Dickinson compiled around 1861. A fascicle is a bundle of poem manuscripts that were bound to form a little book. Dickinson's fascicles were not discovered until after her death, which was in 1886. The poem, which is considered by many to be her best, was written in a ballad meter.
And Emily Dickinson is really an interesting character. She is a bit of a mystery and enigma. She's one of the greatest, if maybe even the greatest poet America has produced. She didn't have a huge... She didn't write epic poems. She didn't have this huge legacy of serious long poems, but she worked in a shorter genre. And what we know to understand about her life, she seemed very isolated. And there's a lot of speculation about what kind of a life she lived. Seems like she lived a life primarily in her head. That she did not have a lot of company. She did not have a lot of. She didn't leave her hometown very much. That from what we know about her, she seems to be fairly isolated, which sort of ratchets up the poignancy of her poetry. This particular poem, Hope is a Thing with Feathers, is one of her most famous poems. And it gives you a sense of really what a complicated woman she was, how a master of verse she was as well. And when you think about the tradition of American poetry, I mean, American poetry, the American poetic tradition, doesn't stand up all that well vis-a-vis the European transition. She's really is a remarkable character. If you look at this poem, Hope is the thing with feathers that perches in the soul and sings the tune without the words and never stops at all. And sweetest in the gale is heard, and sore must be the storm that could abash the little bird that kept so many warm. I've heard it in the chillest land and on the strangest sea, yet never in extremity it asked a crumb of me. You go back to the top of the poem there. Hope, the beautiful idea that we're taking the idea of hope, we're personifying it. It's the little bird, right? Hope is, we'd like to think hope is a crashing wave or a towering cyclone with God inside it, and from the book of Job, but maybe hope is something little. Maybe hope is a little thing with feathers that perches in the soul and sings the tune without the words. That's beautiful, right? Hope gives you the music. It's based in faith, right? Hope is the music, but not the words. The words are the realization of hope and faith that come after, right? Perhaps not in this world, but maybe the next. We won't know what the words are, but in our frail, fallen human state, the music of hope should sustain us. Going back to the image. Hope is the thing with feathers that perches in the soul and sings the tune without the words and never stops at all. That tune will never leave you. It's always there, even if you don't think you can hear it. And sweetest in the gale is heard. Of all the tunes that make us human, of all the melodies of our lives, whether love or pleasure or accomplishment or professional achievement, of all the tunes, hope is the sweetest in the gale. It's heard. And sore must be the storm that could abash that little bird that keeps so many warm. And there's no gale, there's no tempest, there's no crashing hurricane that can silence or drive that little bird away, that little bird who oftentimes is the only little thing we have to keep us warm in a world that is cold and alienating. The revelatory nature of her own soul. You wonder who she had to depend on, what she had in her life to give her comfort and courage, what it was that Emily in her quiet little world of isolation lived for. You get a sense that hope meant a lot more to her than it did perhaps to people with other venues. Go back to the image. So, and sweetest this is in the gale. It is heard, and sore must be the storm that could abash that little bird that kept so many warm. I've heard it in the chillest land, right? And the implication that she's out there in some frozen tundra, right? When it comes to human relationships, human interaction, I've heard it in the chillest land and on the strangest sea, yet never in extremity it asked a crumb of me. And I had to give it nothing. In my worst extremities, my most desperate moments, even still, the hope and the comfort she brought me were not required by me to give her anything. So a very poignant little poem today.
All right, as always, you can follow us on Facebook and Parler. And if you have a question for our Friday Q&A, visit freedomproject.com/askduke or send us a message on social media. Don't forget, the Dr. Duke Show is offered on more than 12 podcast platforms such as Apple, Stitcher, and Spotify. Simply subscribe and consider leaving us that coveted 5-star review to keep the show growing. Now we're going to wrap things up with the fun fact of the day. Portland, Oregon is one of a handful of cities in the country to have a dormant volcano within city limits. Based on recent happenings in Portland, I'm just saying, maybe a little activity wouldn't hurt. Just a little activity.
Good luck finding good luck finding a virgin in Portland to sacrifice to that volcano. And that's going to do it for us this week. For Freedom Project, I'm Dr. Duke. She's Katie. Until next time, stay incinerated, my friends.